Domestic violence affects all of us, regardless of our race, religion, social class or gender. Overwhelmingly, men are the main perpetrators of domestic violence. In our lifetime, around 1 in 3 women will experience some form of domestic violence. In all child protection reports in New South Wales, domestic violence is the primary issue. Hi, I'm Gordon Tallis, and the next half an hour I'm going to introduce you to some real strong men with real life experiences of this horrific issue of domestic violence. These stories are from our community, and these men are asking you to make a change.
Yeah, grew up in Griffith. It's a multicultural sort of area. The mission out the back of there is called the Freeways. Pretty fortunate me pop was still pretty close to the land and used to get us out away from all that stuff, but you'd always see it, the men would get drunk and be out going toe to toe. And it was sort of one of those environments where it was looked down upon to turn the other cheek, so you had to stand up. It's all about being accepted within your community, and I think that was part of it. As long as you stood up, it didn't really matter if you won or lost, but you had to definitely stand your ground. My old man, he was always an aggressive type person. He didn't really know how to communicate that much. He done most of his communicating with his fists. I can remember bouts of, Dad coming home and drunk, obviously, and something would trigger. Maybe Mum wasn't home when she was supposed to be, or she went somewhere, maybe the shop, just to get bread or food for us kids, and she didn't tell him before he went because obviously he wasn't around to tell him, and he'd found out later. I guess it's just the way he was, insecure as such, but it'd be an excuse for him to act out. Because you're so young and you're seeing it, there's not much you can do as a 5 to 10 year old kid as you're seeing it growing up. But I guess helpless would probably be the key word. I just remember on my 16th birthday, in the middle of the night, he just slapped me in the face and woke me up with a slap in the face and said, "Righto, you're 16 now." I think it was about a minute past 12, and said, "Righto, you're 16, let's go out and do it. Sort it out like you reckon you're gonna." And we actually followed through and went out the back and had a bit of a knuckle, and I think he really started to show me a bit more respect from that point on, and not because I made a mark on him or anything like that. I think just the pure fact that I'd really stood up for Mum, and he realised, I was growing from a boy to a man. So Mum knew that us kids had had enough of it. So from there on in, when it did happen again, she sought out help from agencies out there, and started going to places like the Refuge and that, and creating space away from him, and then getting to the police and following through with the police, because unfortunately in our communities it's looked down upon when you go to the police and stuff like that.
I know you've got a sister that was a victim. Can you tell us a bit about Natalie?
The family had moved from our hometown in Wagga to Sydney, and to give me and my brother best opportunity at making the grade in football. Within that time, Natalie had already 2 kids. She was a single mother, and she'd met a gentleman at that time whom we didn't know, but turned out to be somewhat of a perpetrator himself, and had done time for other bouts of violence. But when we met him, she'd only met him for about 3 months, and at the end of that 3 months, when she went to call it off, he wouldn't have a part of it, and therefore I guess was of the frame of mind, if I can't have you, no one can. And that's when it first happened. Natalie was probably about 40-45 kilos, ring and wet. This bloke's probably about 100 kilos, 105. Not only did he bash her, but he continued on to kick her while she was on the ground. Then he proceeded and climbed on top of a car and jumped off the top of a car onto her head. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, not only did he do that to her, but he left her lifeless body laying there, never called for help or anything, until I was lucky someone witnessed it and called it in. So Natalie was found within an inch of her life, and from that point on, getting her to Liverpool Hospital and stuff like that, we found out that she'd suffered traumatic head injuries, and not only were the injuries in itself bad enough, but there was now swelling within the brain that could cause Natalie's death as well. So went from there to probably about a 4-month wait in hospital, and left in a situation whereas Natalie can't talk, walk, or even eat herself. She gets fed through the stomach. She's got to have full-time care all the time. Not only that, she can't move any of her limbs or anything like that. She gets bed sores from laying in the bed. The only thing that does move on her body is her eyelids, and my mum thinks that's a way of her communicating. From this day on, that happened probably about 8 years ago now. Natalie hasn't got any better. If anything, she gets worse. We can't bring her home. Mum's got a house that's got all wheelchair access and stuff like that to get her home, but because of the nature of her illness and any disease could sort of spell the end of her, she can't come out of that environment where she is. So she actually lives now in an old people's home because they don't have a facility for young people that are affected in this kind of manner. So there's either, you either get out of hospital and go home, or the only full-time care you can get is an old people's home. So it's unfortunate that's where Natalie has to spend most of her time. Where the police were looking for him after the incident, there was a search, no one could find him. I'd actually gone up to Sydney to support the family, and I was sitting out the front of my older sister's house, and he actually come looking for me and done a drive-by on the house, and the bullet probably was about that far from my head and then took off. So what can you do in hindsight? You'd love to try and get hold of him or whatever, but you sort of can't. It's hard to say, but you can't attack violence with violence. You've got to be smarter about it because there's no use both of us being in jail, I guess.
Mate, how's it changed your family dynamics?
I guess Natalie's in a state where it's hard because, she hasn't passed away and she's not quite with us. So, there's no time to mourn. You can't put closure to it because she's still here but she's not with us. So my mum and my dad, I think the rest of us in our dynamics have come a whole lot closer because of it, because you just don't know how long your loved ones are going to be around for. That's made us realise, don't ever take anything for granted.
Kevin, can you tell us a bit about your childhood growing up?
Yeah, I grew up not far from here, Gordon, southeastern suburbs of Sydney, right in the sort of edge of South Sydney territory at Maroubra. Grew up in the sort of early 50s through the 60s, pretty much working class suburb back in those days. Domestic violence was a pretty normal stock standard thing in our house, unfortunately. Some of my earliest memories were of Mum being beaten by my father, and that continued all the way through to her death in 1983. She was only 49. The old man gave up work when I was very young, and he basically became a stay-at-home drunk, and Mum had to go out to work on occasions to help keep the family together. There wasn't a great deal of support services back then, and certainly there were no support services for women who were, suffering domestic violence. But Mum would come home from afternoon shift about midnight, and when I was 10 or 12, I can hear the old man accusing her of having an affair and playing up. When the poor woman was only out earning a living to try and keep the family together, put food on the table while he stayed at home and drank it all. So, but I think he was just a bully, pure and simple.
You said you had a normal life growing up, but that doesn't sound normal.
Outside of home, it was normal.
So
You had
no
your
one
mates.
else knew?
No one else knew. When I got to about 10 or 12, we'd find other kids who had similar problems, and at our local school, in primary school, there were 3 or 4 other boys who had similar sort of problems. And I guess thinking back, we sort of had our own little support group, even though we didn't sit down and talk in depth about it. But, I'd say, the old man hit Mum last night, and one of the boys might say, yeah, well, my old man hit my mum the other night. So, and it sort of wouldn't go much further than that, but we tended to have a little bit of time for each other, the 3 or 4 of us. But it was very much swept under the carpet.
Did you think of seeing your uncles, your aunties, the school principal, some of your teachers?
They're some of the people who didn't want to know. They're some of the people that could have put their hands up to help my mother, and they didn't. For example, at family functions, particularly around Christmas, the old man had started on the mother. First the verbal abuse, then the pushing, and then the punching and kicking. And there weren't too many aunties and uncles putting their hand up to stop him either. Neighbours. You would have to have been deaf, dumb and blind and stupid to live in our street and not know that the old man was beating Mum up. Not one neighbour come and put their hand up. It would have been known to school teachers, no doubt. Nothing. We did, however, the local priest used to come along and get us all to pray and pray for our father to stop him doing it. Nothing about praying for Mum, but pray for the old man and maybe it never worked. So there was no one prepared to put their hand up to stick up for Mum, whether it was in public, family gatherings or anywhere else. If one person would have put their hand up and picked Mum's side, it would have made a difference, I believe, but there was no one there for her.
Do you believe that domestic violence played a part in your mother's death?
100% yes. I have absolutely no doubt that my mother would still be alive today had she not suffered nearly 30 years of abuse at the hands of my father. From about the age of 10 or 11, I started to get in between them, up until I left home when I was 16. I used to be there for Mum. I still have guilt today. I still have guilt today, that I left home because I couldn't take it anymore. And it's a source of shame, and I've got to deal with that.
What would you say to your dad now if you saw him?
You go out with a woman, you get engaged to the woman, you marry the woman, you have children with her, and throughout that whole period of time, if you're not verbally abusing her and bullying her, you're beating her. I just can't understand for the love of me why he would do that. These days, there are a tremendous amount of resources. There are community service programs run by state and federal governments, anti-domestic violence associations. There's the White Ribbon Foundation, of which I've been a member of for the last 5 years. Sporting clubs have access to self-help programs, and whether it be an issue around drugs, alcohol, there are plenty of resources around 21st century.
When people talk about domestic violence, I think it's hitting. There's so many other forms of domestic violence, isn't there?
Physical violence is one part of it. There's sexual violence, rape within a relationship, but there's the verbal, the emotional abuse. There's a man not having his wife or partner be able to make her own decisions, have her own money. Their lives are completely and totally controlled by this person. And that person, that man, may not have raised his hand or will ever raise his hand against that woman. But I've seen women who've suffered years of this emotional and mental and verbal abuse. They've no self-esteem, they've no self-worth, and they remind me of my mother. Men have got to pick a side. Men are the problem. 90% of domestic violence is perpetrated by a man, so it's men who have got to fix it. And good men like yourself, like me hopefully, and others, we've got to say to people that violence isn't acceptable against a woman, or anyone for that matter.
Domestic violence is a huge issue in the community. NRL has a huge profile. Why would an NRL star put his name to this campaign?
Well, I think it's just a great cause. I think it's an important cause. I think it's important to get the people to understand that it is an issue in society. It affects a number of people. So, for me personally, I'm very proud to be a part of it. I was fortunate enough to be, involved with a family that was, extremely loving and caring, and obviously my father and mother had their arguments, like any parent, but I've never seen it at home, and I think myself very lucky.
The stats are alarming. 1 in 3 women. Do you know anybody?
Unfortunately, mate, I've come across a number of females that have been a part of it, and I think it's extremely disappointing to see the effects. A girlfriend of mine, just the effects that it has on them, not just then, but years down the track. So I think, the people that are doing this to females, they have to understand that, it's not just there, it's, 2, 3, 4, 10 years down the track that it still affects them. And it's devastating to see what it does to their confidence and their self-esteem and how they carry themselves in the community.
Have you ever stepped in on a domestic violence dispute?
Yeah, again, unfortunately, it's a common thing. I see it when you go out. It's one of the reasons why I don't go out too much anymore, because of the violence that you see out in the public. And I have stepped in on an occasion, and looking back now, it's probably something that I probably shouldn't have done, because I think it escalates the violence. Not knowing that person personally and not knowing who his friends are, and it can be seen as me attacking the guy, and it leaves myself open for me to get in trouble. And I think now, looking back after experiencing that, I would notify the police straight away, or a security guard that's close by, and they can deal with it.
What would you do if you saw one of your mates commit domestic violence?
Mate, if it's a teammate, I'd step obviously straight in. Because obviously we have the relationship where we're teammates, and I know I'm on a personal level, because of the fact that it's not acceptable in my opinion. And I think that while ever they're doing it, the damage that they can do to obviously the girl and to themselves and their future, and with a number of other things, I think it's something that I'd try and put a stop to, or certainly notify someone that this person needs help and they need to be spoken to.
What would you say to someone that has committed domestic violence?
Get help. I think that's that's the big thing. I think people have got to understand that it's not something that you can just flick a switch and it goes away. I think obviously if you can raise a hand or speak abusively to a female, you know, the way I've been brought up, it's just not acceptable.
The biggest thing is, of all, it's never too late to stop, because that next incident could be a fatal one, I guess, like happened to my sister. So if you are an offender, take note of tapes or educational things like this, and see what it's like from the victim's family point of view, and you know, change your ways. Change your ways.
The longer that you put it off, the more damage that you can do to not only yourself but other people around you. So I think you need help. You know, it's something that there's plenty of opportunities to get help out there. It's just taking that first step.
There are men who have been perpetrators that have turned their lives around. They've gone and got themselves help, and they've changed completely how they used to operate. It must take a tremendous amount of courage for these guys to put their hands up, and I know a number of blokes who have, and they're quality men worth knowing. Sure, they made mistakes, and sure they did the wrong thing, but it takes a really good man to be able to recognise that you have, and to be able to move on from that. And if good men can put their hand up and get the message through to other men and the perpetrators, and give them the opportunity to turn their lives around, that's what this anti-domestic violence movement's all about. Good men supporting other good men, and also supporting those men who want to change, who don't want to be what they have been for the rest of their lives. And that's what the anti-domestic violence movement's all about, in my view.
If you feel you can make a change in your family, team or local area, seek support from one of your local community agencies. It's never too late to speak up against domestic violence, and as a community, let's tackle domestic violence together.